Behind every amazing flavor is an amazing human who has perfected their craft. Welcome to Flavors Unknown, a behind-the-scenes look at new flavors and the chefs, pastry chefs, and bartenders who create them, with your host, Emmanuel.
Welcome to another episode of the Flavors Unknown podcast. I am your host, Emmanuel Laroche. I have been in the food industry in Europe and in the US for more than 20 years now. And every other week, I interview trendy chefs, pastry chefs, and bartenders to discover their secret behind the scenes and to understand which ingredients and new flavors they are experimenting with. If you are new to this podcast, my guest last week was Chef Alicent Trent from Isabel and Laurel Hardware in West Hollywood, Los Angeles. You can find all the information about the episodes of this podcast on the website flavorsunknown.com. Click on the episode page. To make sure they are not missing any upcoming episode, please subscribe to the podcast on any phone podcast app. It was Anthony Bourdain that inspired the guest that I have on the show today when he was 17 years old and he was watching an episode of No Reservations. His name? Chef Johnny Spero from the restaurant Reservations in Washington, D.C. This guy has a tremendous mental database of flavors that he has experimenting during his multiple travels in Denmark, Spain, and Asia. His mentors? He has famous ones like René Redzepi, Jose Andres, and John Shields. They all have motivated him to go beyond the obvious and discover his own style. Hi, Chef. How are you?
Hey, I'm doing great. Good morning. How are you?
Yeah, good morning, and welcome to Flavors Unknown. I'm really delighted to have you on the show.
No, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to start my day like this.
So you were part in 2018 of the Netflix culinary competition called The Final Table. So how was that experience? I'm curious.
It was interesting. I think as a young cook, I remember watching like the first couple seasons of Top Chef, and I think I kind of told myself that would never really be something that I'd want to do. Not because I just didn't think it always kind of represented what a chef could actually do when you only have like 15 minutes to make something in a mystery basket. Does that really represent, the voice of a restaurant and your training, years and years of spending time in these kitchens, and you literally have 15 minutes and a pile of randomly assorted ingredients to put together your voice. But when, I got just recently got back from Spain, and I was working on the restaurant at the point that they had reached out to ask if I wanted to be a part of this. So I didn't have the kitchen yet. Like, we had just submitted permits. And I think my mentality kind of switched just from the conversation they had, because it seemed like it was more of an opportunity for me to talk about myself and talk about what I wanted the restaurant to be as it was getting ready to get open. And more than anything, it was an opportunity for me to get out there before the restaurant even, was completed, so people knew who I was and what I was about. And I also had a feeling it was going to come out the same time the restaurant opened. It would get roughly around the same time. It actually took like a full year for it to come out. So it was a couple things that kind of factored into that decision. I wanted to make sure that, I know how hard it is to stay relevant, to stay, in the public eye as, being, with all the new restaurants that open up every day. It was an incredible experience. It was different than most, where it's not an individual cooking. It's somebody you're cooking with, like a partner. And my friend Jess, who was one of my best friends, I was actually her boss for a brief period of time in DC. And then she moved to Spain to stage at Mugaritz and then just never came home. I had just recently left. I had left Minibar and then went and staged at Mugaritz, and we kind of reconnected. We'd always stayed friends, but as soon as the producers were asking, who would you want to cook with in a kitchen? And I tried to think of somebody that was very like-minded and wanted to have a good time.
Okay, and you are still friends now after the competition?
Oh yeah, we talked. We're like, listen, like whatever happens, like we're friends. I want us to represent who we are as people, not who people like. I don't want them to try to put together this idea that we're something different than what we end up being on TV. So I was like, let's have fun. Let's be ourselves, and that's it. So we didn't want to get involved in any kind of drama. Not to say there was any drama, but I would like just represent ourselves. Let's put our two cooking styles together because they were very different. Although she had spent time in Mugaritz, which had, been an inspiration to me for the majority of my career, she had helped Andoni open up a restaurant that was, more South American ingredients from the Basque Country. So she was doing tortillas and more of those kind of flavors, whereas I'm still very kind of like not modernist, but kind of taking influences from elsewhere. It's just very different techniques, but it was cool to see us kind of come together and put those in.
Yeah, because you had to execute like a dish from different part of the world, correct?
Yeah, so it was dishes from different parts of the world, and it had to be both of us had to come together with a singular idea and execute it. And some of the teams would let one person take the lead, and they would make the dish, and the other person would just kind of be like the sous chef. But we kind of took it as it's an experience for us to learn how, like, let's say we were running a kitchen together, two very different styles. Like, how do we do this? And especially like when the first challenge was Mexico, she was making tortillas every single day in the kitchen, but like, how do we do it where it's still a little bit of me put into there? So I think that was the most fun. It was nice to kind of I think one of the things, and it's probably like a ongoing theme in my career, is do things that make you uncomfortable. And it was just, putting us in a situation where it may not be a food or something that we're familiar with, take inspiration from these different countries and put it together into one cohesive idea with somebody else rather than me just doing it myself and having like my singular idea. So it was challenging and fun. And obviously I don't think I could do it now with the restaurant and the baby, but it was definitely, it was a great experience. It's gotten us a lot of exposure. We didn't do it for ego or to like tell everybody that, I'm the world's greatest chef. Because I mean, it's TV and it is what it is. And it was a good experience for us to meet people and network, but not to say I forgot about it or like I blocked it out. It just happened so quickly that I'm like, oh yeah, I'm on Netflix. Like the entire world can see what I'm doing.
Did it have a real positive impact on your image and your popularity the way you expected for the restaurant?
I think so. I think one of the biggest things when we talk about the vision of the restaurant, like obviously there's the culinary side and the direction we want to go in there. But one of the things that's really important to me is the culture that we've created. And I think the show represented like who I am as a person. Like I am a happy-go-lucky guy. I mean, obviously I take food seriously, but not myself. And I think everyone was always, every person that came in, they're like, you just seemed like you were just really genuine and happy to be there. And it was good. So I think it definitely, the voice that I have now at the restaurant that we've established over the past couple months was definitely represented on there. Like I was not a different person in front of a camera. I wanted to make sure that was also the case as well. Like my message was consistent, whether there's a camera in front of me or it's just me talking to a friend or a guest in the kitchen. Like I shouldn't change who I am depending on the audience. It should always be the same voice. So I think a lot of people come in and that's like, they're like, hey, we had no idea what this restaurant was because I'm in Georgetown in Washington, D.C., down a historic alleyway. They're like, but we saw you on the final table. So for people that would have had no idea, I mean, they don't go out to eat as often, or maybe they have like their favorite neighborhood restaurant. They're like, we didn't realize that there was a chef from D.C. representing, the United States in a world competition.
All these international dishes and so on was great, like, and up your alley because travel has really had a big impact on who you are as a chef today. I mean, you have been everywhere, almost around the world. You've been to Denmark, to Vietnam, to Singapore, Cambodia, Japan, Spain. I think like the first time you and I met, you were just coming back from Spain, if I remember.
I think I was home for maybe like a week. I came to
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. I remember that. So what or whom, influenced you to pack your bag and become this globe trotter, like, around the planet?
I was thinking about what was the thing that got that bug, like crawled underneath me and told me to just like get out and see the world. And I think a lot of it was, I grew up in a really small town in Baltimore County. There was like a buffalo farm next door. I didn't really have a lot of culture. Like the first restaurant I ever worked in was just like this casual American bistro in like, there was a tiny little shopping center up the street, a garden supply store, a Safeway, a drugstore, and this restaurant. And I didn't really know anything outside of, what I assumed would be like these classic American dishes. And I think as I got a little bit older, I got like a little glimpse in what the outside world had. And I just kind of took it upon myself. It's like, listen, like the world's a bigger place than Phoenix, Maryland. I think, and food, I mean, more than anything, food's the one that kind of influenced me and showed me that. Like at an early age when I started realizing what, real Japanese cuisine was when it wasn't, cucumber California rolls. And because I mean, back when I started cooking, the internet wasn't what it is now. There was no Flickr, there was no Instagram, there weren't like a million blogs that I had access to. So I was kind of I left my own devices to kind of like find these moments of inspiration. They just kind of pop up randomly. And I think the biggest one is actually like Anthony Bourdain, which is crazy to think. I mean, I was at a point in my career where, I mean, not my career, I just started. I'd worked in these restaurants throughout Baltimore County, and I thought I knew everything. I'm like, okay, great. I can work the meat station. I can work salad station. I can take frozen desserts out of a box and put on a plate. What else is there to do? I was 17, but I was looking to go to culinary school, and there was an episode and I just kind of recently stumbled on Anthony Bourdain as well. I mean, again, I didn't really know too much about the outside culinary world. And there was the episode where he basically does like the entire hour dedicated to El Bulli. That like completely just blew my mind. I had no idea. It changed. I mean, I can say like that was the point that probably started me in this path of where I am now, as far as like stylistically the food that I've always been attracted to, but also just looking at this chef who turned when I thought food was just meant, for sustenance, and turned it into an experience and realized, I want that. I'd always been like a very artistic kid, and at one point I considered going to art school, and I never did well in school. I'm sure this is like it's a pretty common running theme with most chefs that the school system just didn't work for most of us, and we didn't work inside of it. And I had an interest outside of that. I mean, I loved to draw, and I thought I was going to be like a graphic designer, but something about food just kept bringing me back in. It was like the only place I felt really comfortable and had taken more of my attention than anything else. When I saw this episode about Anthony Bourdain traveling to, Roses, Spain, and
was it like a part unknown at that time already?
No, it wasn't, because this was 2006, I think. 2000. Oh yeah, 2005, 2006. So it was still. Was it No Reservations? I think it might have been No Reservations at that point.
Yeah.
And I saw the influence of Japan and all these different things that had kind of shaped his cuisine. And I was like, oh, my food can be, although like most people tell you food is a craft. I mean, I can be both, but it's like there's a lot of artistic interpretation on a lot of stuff. And that's what drew me in. I mean, it was like the plates were things that I'd never seen before. I mean, just the actual plates and the dishes they were serving. So I think that's when I was like, okay, I need to get out of, this kind of suburban area and go into a city and just start working. And I remember I was so living so close to DC, and it was like the biggest city that I lived by. I was like, okay, well, I need to go to DC. My brother was going to art school close by. So I just kind of packed up and came to DC. And I remember I had like my list of like I found the top 10 restaurants in DC. And like one of those being, Minibar by Hills and Andres. I'm like, well, there's no way I'm going to be able to go work at Minibar. So let me start somewhere else on that list. And, I started working for the chef. His name's Maru. He had a restaurant called Fair Olivia, and he was from the Ivory Coast. And he was very, very much inspired by some of the similar things as well. Like he loved WD-50 was like one of those restaurants that just kind of like, I couldn't get enough of like trying to figure out how he did everything. And Maru kind of showed me a lot of stuff. I mean, again, like Ivory Coast, like I'd never had injera bread or Berbere spice. And he showed me a lot of different ingredients, and I just kept building like this database of the flavor, but also like this desire to see more. And yeah, he just let me kind of create whatever I wanted. I got to do. I mean, I was 21 at that point, and I got to do like an amuse-bouche for every guest that came in, for essentially like anything I wanted. He gave me free reign to explore and kind of find what I wanted to do. And it was super satisfying. But I also at that point realized I had no idea what I was doing. I was trying to kind of create in the like somebody else's voice, essentially, like looking at, a Bulli and Albert Adria. I didn't understand how to make the technique like work, but I didn't understand why it worked. So I kind of started to push my way around a little bit. So I left that restaurant. I went to go work at this restaurant called Comey here in DC. And every chef has kind of pushed me to go in a different direction. And that restaurant pushed me to, I was the pastry chef for the last year. And I was like absolutely obsessed with Jordan Kahn and Albert Adria. And that's when he had his book Natura come out. Like my mind just kept slipping back to like this modern Spanish cooking. I realized like as much as I love DC, there's a big world out there. And that was the first time I'd ever actually traveled to Europe was to go stage at NOMA, which I think at that time, it
was not as popular today.
Definitely, it was definitely like, it was up there, but it wasn't, I don't think Rene Redzepi was a household name at that point. But I remember I sent an email and I'm like, this isn't going to work. I'm like, there's a million people like me in the world. Why would a restaurant like that say, yes, come stage here? I sent an email just because I'm like, let's just see what they have to say. 2 days later, I get an email back on my phone and I just lost it. Like I had no idea. I'm like, I'm like, I guess I have to sell everything I have to get a plane ticket and go to go to Copenhagen now.
Wow.
So that was like my real first experience traveling. I mean, I obviously I traveled around the United States with my family as a kid, but never had I traveled internationally for
outside of the country.
Yeah. That was the first one. And that, I mean, from there, obviously it went all over the place, but
you got the bug after that.
Yeah. It was like, okay, food can take you to a million different places around the world, and it can get you in the door where it normally couldn't. Like at that point, I didn't need a visa. So I was able to go work. I went to Copenhagen for like 2 months, and, you know, I staged, and then, and I had all the intention of just staying there for the rest of my life, because I was in Copenhagen in the middle of like January and February, like dead of their winter. And I loved every moment of it. I was like, oh, I want to stay here. I want to be here. And money goes quick when you're a stage and you don't have any saved up. I mean, I didn't have like a trust fund I could pull money out of. I just spent the money. Actually, I had to borrow a little bit of money from my sister. Then I came home. From that moment on, like nothing was ever going to be good enough. NOMA had changed my entire, again, so another moment in time where just like, I was like, okay, I need to be much more vigilant on where, like, knowing the ingredients that we're using, where they're getting from, what we have in this area. It just kept pushing me. Like, I just kept seeing these new things, like where I was used to like seeing prepackaged steaks and vegetables coming frozen, to like going there where it's this forager drops a bag off of like the most beautiful sorrel. And you have like, it's just like the quality of ingredients, like the langoustines coming right off the boat that day. And it just pushed me. And I came back to DC like so incredibly lost. I didn't know what I was going to do, because there was, at that time, like I didn't see anybody doing anything like that. So that's when I bounced around DC a little bit, still just lost, like no idea where I was going to go. And I moved to not the most exotic place in the world, but I think probably, in my opinion, one of the most influential restaurants in the United States at the time. I moved down to Chilhowie, Virginia, to work with who I consider to be like my culinary mentor and also my best friend, John Shields. He had a restaurant down there called Townhouse, and now he's in Chicago, and he's got a 2 Michelin star restaurant called Smith. So that's where, when I met him, I found like another guy that was equally as obsessed with like marguerites and just textures and ingredients, and we go foraging. And that was, again, like just another moment in time where like when I could just nerd out about travel and all this international influences, because I felt like I didn't have a lot of people like close by that not to say I didn't have any other passions outside of the kitchen, but I think I had basically put everything on the back burner. I'm like, okay, my entire life is about cooking and reading books. Like I remember I asked my parents for the Fat Duck cookbook when it first came out for Christmas, and they were like, you want a book for Christmas? I was like, yeah. Like, so John Shields is, I would say, like, I mean, I have a lot of mentors and people that have shaped me today, but if I could say, like, there was one that really kind of helped me focus on stylistically, like who I wanted to be, not mimicking him in any way, but helping me find my voice and pushing me to be better, was him. I mean, working at a Townhouse, I think we were doing some of the most creative food in the States, and we were in the middle of Virginia inside of a state park. And it's just wildly crazy stuff. There was no limitation on what we could do. And he definitely taught me a lot, but that again pushed me to go see more of the world. So we closed for a month to go on vacation. And that's when I went and did like my whole Asia tour. So I started in Singapore, then went to Vietnam, Cambodia, and Japan. And again, places that always kind of influenced me. Like I loved like bun bue and pho, because I had a lot of Vietnamese friends here in Virginia. And I was like, let's just go see what it's like in Vietnam. Rather than just, it's kind of my thing. Like I have a ton of cookbooks, and I like using them as like, they're great for inspiration, but there's something about actually going to the place where they're created and like where those ingredients are and experience it firsthand. Like clearly I didn't do well in school, so books don't teach me. Firsthand experience does. So they kind of pushed me, they showed me where I wanted to go, and I just kind of followed them there. So that's what kind of took me. I mean, Japan was amazing, and going to the Tsukiji market at 3:00 in the morning and seeing all these ingredients and pushing me. I feel like there's, even now, like as we're having this conversation, I'm trying to think where else do I want to go, because I could just repeat all the cool places I've been. And I'm like, where should I go now? I mean, I have a wife and a daughter, so it clearly changes things, but
yeah, that's exactly. Yeah.
Because I can't just, go crash on somebody's sofa and just work for free and have a free place to stay. But because that's food kind of helped me do that. Like I traveled the world and I didn't make a lot of money, and I didn't have a lot about like other resources, but food made it much more made it easy. I knew I always could go find work, or I always could have a place to stay.
Now, when you're looking back and thinking about like all those young generation of of individuals, men and women that are interested in this business. I mean, will you recommend this first hand experience and pack your bag and travel and discover, all those different traditions and, cultural influences on food versus, going into like a culinary school where maybe sometime you have to take loans and, and after that, spend a part of your life, paying those loans back?
I mean, yeah, I would say like it kind of depends on. I mean, I know there's a lot of different people that try to get into like the industry. Like there's people that just think that it's the only place for them because they have no other place to go. Because I feel like the industry was oftentimes thought of like a place for like these like social refugees who didn't want to go have an education, just like to party. And then there's the other side where it's like career changers who fell in love with food and they start cooking. And then, I mean, there's people just have always kind of loved it. So I think it really kind of depends on what your background is. But when I look at a resume, I typically just skip past anything that has to do with your education. I understand people look at it to make sure that you're like, it shows a level of commitment. Like a lot of schools, like whether it's like CIA or things like that, like you definitely get like a good baseline education and skill set. But if I'm looking at a cook who I want to come work at my restaurant and we only have, my entire team, entire restaurant, including dishwashers, server assistants, everything is probably like 14 or 15 people. The kitchen's it's a pretty small team, but the thing that's most important is that I look at people that want to be at the restaurant, but also have like a desire to learn and push. And I feel like firsthand experience for most people is, and I think especially in a kitchen, is probably the most important. I mean, you can read a book on how to brunoise vegetables, but you're not going to learn how to do it until you actually physically touch it. And I think just being able to taste, like we have recipes in the restaurant, but for the most part, a lot of it is about tasting it and kind of like just feeling the food. And I think the only way you can ever do that is if you get out there and just like taste the world and build this database, like this culinary database of flavors and textures and, different temperatures. Like I think I was just always open. I always just said yes to eating everything. But the worst thing that's going to happen if you try something you don't like it, like that's it. You're not going to like it unless you have an allergic reaction. That's the worst case. But eating, balut in Vietnam, like, fertilized duck eggs or durian, it's just like anything. Like you need to taste and try as many things as you can, because that's the only way that you can build a successful flavor combination is if you know something works or if it doesn't. It's only because you're trying it. So like when young cooks, if they're career changing, they're like, we're thinking about going to culinary school. I always tell them to why don't you come stage with me for a week and just get an idea of like, not to say we're like every kitchen, but get an idea of what it's actually like to work in a kitchen. And then you can decide if it's something you want to pursue. But also I think I always often tell them that I don't hire based on culinary school like papers. I hire on desire and passion. I would always push, not against, but the other way. Like if you have money to like spend on school, take that money to travel and go stage different restaurants. Like I think that's the best way to do it. I mean, you get a different, every kitchen's different, every state's different, every country, they have so many different things to offer. So if you're willing to be in a little bit of debt, I think I'd rather go eat at the restaurants and see the world than see a classroom.
Yeah. So what will be your advice where to go now? Because, at that time when you went into, Denmark and Copenhagen, obviously, we went to NOMA and became, one of the iconic restaurants, on the planet. So, nowadays, what would be your recommendation if you had to pick like 3 restaurants, around the world for, this young generation to go and stage at?
Interesting. Let's see. I think a lot of young cooks obviously know what NOMA is, and I look at what they're doing now, and it's so light years beyond what I would ever assume. But I feel like if you were to go anywhere in the world, let's say you go to Copenhagen, I love what Christian Puglisi is doing at Relay, because it's very ingredient focused. It's not wildly manipulated. It's just pure flavor. I had a meal there years ago, and I think most people know where Relay is now, and Jonathan was the chef there. I think being able to spend time in a restaurant like that where it's so ingredient driven, and just what they do is just beautiful. And they don't have a kitchen of like 60 people picking herbs. I think it would give you an opportunity to be very hands on. But I think Copenhagen, there's so many amazing restaurants there. Like you have 108, Geranium. I think it really kind of depends where you go. But I guess if I was looking at a list of the places that inspire me right now, because I never got to go to El Bulli, I would Spain. I mean, I was in Basque Country, Spain for a year, but looking at other places that I would want to go in Spain alone is like Disfrutar in Barcelona and Enigma. I think when you look at what Disfrutar does, you can see a lot of similarities to the way that El Bulli was, but it's a very different kind of stylistically, a very different restaurant. And then, obviously like Albert Adria, who's like probably like one of the greatest chefs in the world with Enigma. Enigma just looks like an incredible experience. And I think seeing different versions of what people consider to be a high-end dining experience, where like Enigma, like you move from room to room, and it's like using the entire building as an experience. I think it gives people a different viewpoint on how you can do these like super kind of like modernist avant-garde restaurants, and very stylistically very different.
And anywhere in Asia, maybe?
Yeah. Hong Kong looks like it. I mean, Hong Kong just, the more I've been able to travel throughout most of Asia, but I've never been to Hong Kong. I kind of started looking into it a little more, and it's just always seemed like it's just like, I mean, one, I love seafood. So it seems like there's just an abundance of that in Hong Kong, like a lot of like shellfish, but I think Hong Kong would be a pretty cool place to go. I really enjoyed my time at Singapore. I think there's definitely a lot of like amazing restaurants in Singapore, but I think I want to go maybe Hong Kong. I think Hong Kong would be a pretty cool place to like belong and eat, going there.
So Denmark, Spain, and Hong Kong.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So obviously, this travel experience, found their way into like your food and even the space, at your restaurant Reverie in Washington, D.C. that I had the chance to come to. Can you share with us some maybe specific examples and maybe unforgettable experiences that you had in those countries that you went to?
Yeah.
And how it translated maybe into, the space and some of the dishes and Reverie?
The space itself, like even like food apart, like the space itself is very much inspired by just kind of classic and simplistic Scandinavian and Japanese design. It's very, I would say it's stark or cold, but we have a lot of natural elements, like the concrete walls are still kind of exposed, and the walls are even painted gray to kind of match that. Then there's like just small amounts of wood and just a lot of kind of natural textures, just kind of that runs kind of rampant throughout most of classic, like kind of very simplistic Japanese and Scandinavian design. But the food, for the most part, I mean, we call it modern American because it kind of just means I can grasp at all my different inspirations and travels and kind of put it together on a plate. And no one questions if I'm doing Italian or French or, Japanese. It's the restaurant's food stylistically is me. So you definitely see a lot of my travels and experiences put into a plate where it may not always be a direct dish that has kind of made its way onto the menu that I've seen elsewhere, but you can definitely see some of the nuances from the different places that I didn't make it on there. But like, for example, almost every Sunday when I was in San Sebastian, me and my friends would go eat at a restaurant called Bar Nestor. They have a very small menu. They serve chuleta, which is just the ribeye of a cow, much older. It's like the Spanish beef is amazing. I mean, different. You can obviously have much older cows in Spain than you can in the United States. The beef is very different, but there's chuleta, and you just get, padron peppers, tomato salad, a couple different things. And it was just this after working at Uber Eats every single day and then going out to dinner on Sunday night. And we all just sit down and we'd get like 1 or 2 steaks to split amongst 8 of us, which was not like a ton of meat, but it was just like this, it was like this gathering of like just friends. They're completely white, but you get like reinvigorated around food. And so we have a dish on the menu kind of inspired by that, where we're using American beef, which is a little bit younger, but we still cook it in that Spanish style where we temper it, sear it, and then cut right into it. And since it's not as old as the cows that they're getting in Spain, we add lardo on top of it. I just add a little bit more fat. And then the sauce that we put on it, rather than doing like a really heavily reduced meat sauce, it's actually, it's caramelized onions and seaweed, just reduced down with water and mirin over and over and over again until it's like this really nice viscous sauce. But it tastes super meaty and umami, but it is made as just seaweed and onions, and that just glazes the beef. And now that we're in the summertime, we have these beautiful heirloom tomatoes that go out with the dish, as well as chanterelle sauteed in cherry vinegar, confit duck egg. And we looked at that the other day. I'm like, yeah, this is very much like a Basque inspired dish. Whereas I don't consider myself to be, a Spanish chef in any way. And I keep saying that. I keep saying that to all my friends. And they're like, well, then why do you have a leg of jamón ibérico in your kitchen? Because we have a jamón ibérico that we serve to people. I think the places that I've been have always inspired the ingredients that I like. But I think it was definitely, that dish definitely is inspired by the culture and the gathering of that, just like Basque cuisine kind of brings together. It's like meant to be shared. And just like a really fond memory that I have. And then looking else in the menu, like there was a brief time where I was doing like a classic Spanish tortilla with uni, where I was taking something that I loved and not even elevating, just adding a different ingredient. And then like Scandinavia flavor profiles, raw scallop with buttermilk and dill, which is like one of our signature dishes. Like a lot of the food that I had in Copenhagen, there's a lot of dill, that acidity from buttermilk, and that just kind of translated in some of the flavor profiles that we use. But that's another dish that we'll always have on the menu.
So when you're looking at creating like a new dish, for your menu, where the inspiration starts, is it starting from the memory of and some of the travel experiences that you had? Did it start with the produce and you combine those things together? I'm curious, what's the first step, for you?
I think it's definitely changed. Like when I was younger, it was definitely like flipping through cookbooks and looking at these dishes that people were doing and trying to. And I don't think it was authentically me. Like I think you read all these books and you think you have these ideas, but really it's kind of just drawn from other people who've already kind of created these dishes. But I think subconsciously you're making it think that it's your idea when it's really not. So when I'm thinking about dishes, like I try not to, grab a cookbook off the wall and just look through it. It's kind of now, it definitely starts with, as we've evolved the restaurant too, it starts with a conversation with our farmers, our purveyors, about like whether it's seafood or vegetables that we have coming in. So it definitely starts with the ingredient now. There's a farm that's actually right next to where my parents still live in Baltimore County. And he reached out to me and he brought a bunch of, sungold tomatoes and all these other different vegetables that he has. He grows a lot of like roast 7 seeds from Dan Barber. He just gave me like this box of vegetables, and we just took these vegetables and we just cooked them every which way, ate them raw. And that's where it starts getting, the inspiration starts. Like, let's focus on highlighting these ingredients, not masking them and letting them kind of stand out. Whereas like when I was younger, it was definitely like, let's do the cool technique. Like what's going to be like a showstopper? What's everyone going to stop and look at? Kind of realize that a lot of those techniques should be used to like elevate the dish, not be a showpiece. So for me, I kind of flipped it around, like where it starts with the ingredient and then the technique comes after that. It's like, what is going to elevate this dish? What's going to showcase this ingredient? We don't necessarily have to tell a story about where it's from. It can just kind of be delicious on a plate.
When you have, you want to celebrate this, great ingredient that you have, how do you decide that I'm going to give because you're talking about modern American cuisine. So I'm going to take maybe Nordic or European influence on it. So I'm going to have like an Asian, twist on it and, or something in French or whatever. How does it work?
I think the way that I think about food now and the way that the flavors have kind of come together is that it's less picking a particular country or flavor profile where it's like, this is going to be more of like a Japanese style. This could be French. I think because I've kind of been like this, say America's like a melting pot of culture. I think for most of us, as we travel, like we've kind of melded these things together and you draw like certain techniques and flavors from all the different places. So now it's like, I'm going to choose, okay, this is going to be more kind of inspired by my trips to Scandinavia or something like this. It might just be a technique that I learned from there. Or like, for instance, like we started cooking a lot of our vegetables in, shio koji, like liquid shio koji or using rice kojis and things like that. But they often get paired with other flavors that might be more associated with Scandinavia, like the scallop dish I mentioned earlier. Like the scallops are dressed in shio koji, yuzu, and finger limes, and then it gets a mixture of this buttermilk emulsion. That's buttermilk that we make in house with a poisse. I mean, we make butter in house that we culture with a poisse, and then we use that buttermilk left over from the butter production to make this sauce. So already we have like Japanese, Scandinavia, and then French funky cheese. So I think for me, it's hard for me to really kind of just nail down, where would I, like visually most people would probably say that my food looks like very, very Nordic because it's what they can associate with what happened with the new Nordic movement, the way that, kind of more natural or like New Spain, especially like Mugarich, it's like very inspired by nature. And I think that's kind of true. Like that's what our food is now, like it's inspired by the ingredients. But I think I try to, and maybe it's an intentional thing that I try not to create stylistically so much from one place or another. I want it to be mine. And I think it draws just for who I am as a person. I've taken so much from other places and built this, like I keep talking about, like this database. And I think I just use that as those are the like certain profiles work with different things. So where we might use like white soy miso for a sauce, but there's other ingredients that may not necessarily be associated with Japan. Like I think we just stopped thinking about how can we compartmentalize or put these little ideas in boxes and have it fit perfectly inside of stylistically in the cuisine, and let's just make it taste good. So it means using those ingredients and techniques that we've learned from elsewhere, and just as long as it's cohesive and it doesn't seem like it's trying to recreate, some classic dish with like a spin on it. I think that's what we don't need to do like our take on something. I think we try to be as authentic to what we can or who we are, and just try to use those influences as it adds to the dish rather than trying to just showcase like, yes, this is a Japanese dish now.
Before, there was something very interesting that you said when you were talking about cooking, and you said, it's more about artistic like interpretation versus, being a craft. So can you explain to us what you meant by that?
I think there's been that argument, and people always talk about it, that cooking, it's not art, it's craft. You're cooking a piece of meat, but I feel like, different levels of cuisines and different restaurants, there's different approaches to that. And I feel like we've always kind of had an artistic side. There's definitely some chefs that like to, paint on plates and do a little bit more than that. But I feel like for me, especially with the way that we cook food, that it's not just food on a plate. Like, we're not just cutting a piece of meat, putting a blob of sauce on it and putting it out. I think it can kind of be an expression of how I see food and how I want it to be perceived. So whether it's the way we garnish it or the way that something, how it's on the plate or just the plates themselves, it's given me a little bit more inspiration on, like, most importantly, I make sure the food tastes good. And that always has to be number one. But after we get that, we're like, okay, how do we want to present this where it's created in our vision and people can look at it? Like, we want people to be like, okay, that's a dish from Reverie. Like, that's like, we have our, stylistically, we kind of have like our own, a way of doing things. It starts off with, with what we're plating on. So one of my best friends, Amber Kendrick, she has a company called Cloud Terre. I met her, 7-8 years ago, and she designed most of the plates for Reverie. So she gave us we talked about it kind of always being like a canvas, and we've evolved and grown like stylistically. Like, when we first designed plates together 8 years ago, they were very different to what they are now. But we talk about, the colors that I use when I cook, and it's not because I intentionally choose to cook with this. They're usually dark, and there's a lot of berries and a lot of kind of vibrant herbs, and finding a way to build a plate. Like, if you put that on a black or green plate, it's not going to look the same. But when you have it on this kind of matte white plate that has a little bit of like an offset glaze, and they're all a little bit different, and it's, that wabi-sabi where every plate's a little bit different, and then you have this beautiful, vibrant dish on it, it stands out. Like, I think it's a choice that we make to find a way to, if we didn't care about how the food looked, we'd be serving it in cardboard boxes. But I think it gives me a little opportunity to have like a little bit of finesse, and it doesn't always change the way the food tastes, but I think it changes the way that it's perceived.
And do you think about Instagram now that the people, uploading your dishes, on Instagram, it's a part of your, thinking process and creative process?
Yeah. I think it's, the way that we built the restaurant too, like, working in a lot of restaurants when I was younger, where they were dark and not well lit, and people would take these terrible pictures of the food and then post it. And for most people, like, before they go to a restaurant, like, the experience starts way before they even step foot into it. Now, it used to be, in my opinion, like, when you would go on the website, you'd see the images that we posted, and then you would make your reservation. That's where it started. But now, you can hit the geotag on Instagram and see every single dish that I've done from the time that we have opened until now. And some of the pictures are pretty bad. But then you have the people that actually, like, take the time to do it. And I think originally, like, growing up, you're like, just eat the food. But now, it's an opportunity for another audience to see what we do. So the restaurant's really well lit. It's not dark and moody. It's pretty vibrant. And yeah, when we look at the plates, it's not less like, how's this going to look on Instagram? It's like, make sure it's beautiful, because if they do take a picture, they share it. We want it to represent who we are. If 100%, like, unless you have like a no picture policy, that your picture is going to go on Instagram and social media. But it's also like, that's like, social media is like it's a networking tool, and that's what it should be used as. Like, it's a place for us to share our ideas, and like, I post on Instagram constantly. It's a picture of either my daughter, my dog, or food. And it gives us an opportunity to kind of show the things that we're doing, and it also it gets it out there so people can kind of see us. So 100%, if I always think about our social media presence, because it's huge. I look at and it's also helpful because there's not many times that I'm not here for service, but I was like in Russia, a couple of weeks ago, and I would look at the geotag and just see what the food looked like when I wasn't there. So it's so I think about Instagram for a lot, because it keeps me like if I, for some reason I don't see it, or I want to like see how it's being perceived when I'm not there, like, or how it's being presented. So it's a good way for me to kind of stalk my restaurant when I'm not around.
Yeah, exactly. And you're talking about as well, in the past, people, or I mean, still today, of course, looking at, cookbook and sometimes for inspiration, but obviously, specific Instagram, sites are going to play that role as well, from restaurants where you are going to be able to see now in most and like very quickly, what's going on in all those places, around the world. So that's pretty interesting.
When I was younger, we didn't have that. And I felt like the way that information travels so much like faster now, like it's changed the industry. I think it's probably changed a lot of industries. Like it's when you have like this instant gratification, being able to see a dish and get the recipe and watch a video on it. It changes. Like for me, like the amount, like if I had that, who knows where I'd be in my career right now. I'm not saying I'd be farther ahead or maybe behind, but it's hard to say. But I feel like it's with that, like I can post something on Instagram, get like 200 likes, and then somebody comes in like, hey, we saw the dish you posted. It's just crazy how fast like an Instagram thing or somebody who's like an influencer, as they, whatever they say, like if they post something about your restaurant, it changes. Like there's a return on investment on that kind of stuff. You can see an increase in business for, somebody posting something about your restaurant. If it looks beautiful, they're going to want to try it. So it's interesting.
And if the people wants to follow you or your restaurant on Instagram, I mean, they will have all the information on the show notes, from the podcast for this episode. So, they can go on, flavorsunknown.com and look on your episode page, and they will have all that info. Talking about the name of your restaurant, so Reverie, which in French, means kind of a constant state of like dreaming, correct?
Yeah.
So why that name?
Yeah, I mean, that was kind of it. I mean, looking at the definition of the word, daydream, like being pleasantly lost in your own thoughts. I was always kind of told that's kind of how I lived my life. I was always present, like physically, but my mind would always drift elsewhere. And being in the kitchen I think I mentioned before, was the only thing that really kind of drew me in, maybe pay attention, and gave me, any kind of, I wasn't like a goldfish where I was just like 3 seconds everywhere else. Like I was just focused. It's like two parts. It's the thing that kind of food drew me in and kind of from a daydreamer to kind of focus that. But also the restaurant itself is kind of meant to be kind of like that. Like you've been here, so, you walk down the alleyway. It's kind of like, it's a discreet one way.
It's beautiful.
Yeah. And then you go down this cobblestone alleyway into a restaurant that's tucked away in a back alleyway where you can't really tell if you're in, like if you were just to like wake up in this restaurant, you wouldn't know if you were in, Copenhagen or France or New York or San Francisco. It's meant to kind of transport you to the restaurant. And like when you're here, you're here. So it's less about the location and more about, being inside the restaurant and being with us. It should kind of be, take you away from your day to day, like whether it's a casual fine dining setting like us or, some weird modern avant-garde restaurant. It should be kind of transportive and almost put you into like this dream state where you can kind of just like forget everything in the real world and just kind of be right here and be present and kind of forget about everything else.
What is one of the latest ingredients or little ingredients that that you are obsessed with or that you are experimenting with?
There's a handful of ingredients that I always have in my inventory. They're not to say they're the ones that I'm most comfortable with, but they're the ones that I like to kind of experiment with the most. But actually right now, we have like a really cool group of farmers that we get some stuff from, and most of it's like one or two things from these guys. We have a farmer, there's this guy Drew, and he's given me 2 ingredients that I've kind of tried to find a way to get them on both savory and sweet dishes. He's got some property out in Culpeper, Virginia. He came in one day and just was trying to sell me on microgreens, and I told him I didn't use microgreens. And he's like, well, I got a bunch of other weird stuff. I was like, cool, I like weird stuff. So he told me that he had some birch trees on his property. And he had tapped them and got, 14 gallons of birch syrup. I was like, cool, I'll take all of it. He brought me the birch bark from those trees. So we have a dessert on the menu right now it's pretty much dedicated to him. It's his birch bark we turn into ice cream, and then we use birch syrup to sweeten it. So that's one of the like a dish that I'm like wildly obsessed with and trying to play around with it a little bit more. He also made us pine syrup. So he brought me in a bunch of baby pine cones. He made syrup out of that, and he also pressed it for me. So those are kind of fun, like finding ingredients that, they're not new by any means, but new for us, and just trying to do And you take on that. And then also with similar farmers, like obviously we have amazing animal proteins in this area, but we have that farmer who just brings us some really beautiful vegetables. So we have like the beautiful white cucumbers right now, kohlrabi. For the most part, like I will always have lamb on my menu. I'll always have some kind of beef, and there will always be like a heavy seafood presence. But vegetables are also, and I think that's a lot of people will say like they want vegetables to kind of take the lead in a lot of stuff, that it is just as important as a piece of steak on a plate. But this farmer, he sends us a new list every week, and I think those are the ingredients that we really kind of strive to showcase now. Like not vegetarian dishes, so to speak, but I guess dishes that highlight these really unique, beautiful vegetables.
So you're talking about kohlrabi, and I've seen kohlrabi in a lot of menus around the country. So what seems to be trendy in the past years? So what are you making with kohlrabi?
We actually just put it on the menu yesterday. We've had kohlrabi on the menu in a couple different forms, and I think the version that we're doing it kind of came together naturally. But again, this dish is kind of mostly the ingredients that this farmer gets us. So we take the kohlrabi, we scrub it, split it in half so it's open, and then we cook it sous vide in toasted hay, butter, and shio-koji, just till it's like not cooked all the way through, but till it's a little bit more tender. And then the side that we've cut after it's cooked, we put it into a hot pan, sear it, and then we just slowly baste it for about 20 to 30 minutes with butter, just to get a little bit more flavor. It's kind of almost like you would with a piece of meat. You slice it, and it's served with frothed hay butter. It's charred eggplant puree with sweet potato hoisin, currants, chanterelle mushrooms. Basically we just take all these vegetables in this farm and we just char them over the fire and then serve that. So it's using the kohlrabi gets cooked and then sliced just like you would like a piece of steak, covered with all these beautiful ingredients, and it's the texture that it gets from being cooked sous vide and then also just like slowly basted with the butter. It permeates through, and it's a great vessel to carry flavor, but also just has such a great flavor on its own. It kind of came together yesterday. Like we had an idea for the dish, and then we had all these vegetables that we got from our farmer. And I think that might be one of my favorite preparations that we've done with kohlrabi in the past. A lot of the times we would serve it raw.
That sounds delicious. Yeah.
Yeah, it's beautiful. I'll take it. I forgot to take a picture of it yesterday, so I'll take a picture today and I'll send it over to you so you can see it.
Yeah, absolutely. That would be great. So I like to pick the brain of my guests, thinking about people that are listening and that are really foodies and are doing their home cooking. And of course, so we are in the summer, so burgers are pretty popular at the moment. So I'm curious, thinking about your inspiration coming from your travel, Japan, Denmark, Spain. What would be your suggestion? How people can prepare a burger at home, maybe with a twist that would come from either, of those places that you've been to?
So we have a burger on our menu, which is, a lot of people look at what we do and they're like, why would you have a burger on your menu? And for me, it's about not alienating anybody and having food that just tastes delicious. But our burger kind of has some inspiration from America, like classic America, but also a little bit of Japanese influence as well. So one of the things that we do, I love smash patty burgers. I know a lot of people like to grill burgers. I like to do them in a pan because I love the crisp, which is that's like a very American style, middle America, smash it in a pan, get it crispy, and then soft cheese on it. What I like to do to add, instead of just doing a very, adding lettuce, tomatoes. I don't do lettuce and tomatoes on my burgers. We do stewed onions, but the thing that really kind of makes our burger pop is that our pickles are basically, it's like misozuke, so it's like the Japanese style pickled cucumbers. We bury cucumbers that we get from one of our farmers. We salt cure them first, just for 30 minutes, and then bury them in miso and shio-koji and a little bit of rice wine vinegar and sake, mixed together this really heavy paste. And we bury the cucumbers for about a week. They just naturally start to ferment, and then we rinse them and slice them and put them on our burger. So I think that's always, I really like that because it's not like a vinegar acidity. It's just kind of the lactic fermentation. It's absolutely delicious. They're a little more rich. I think that's the one thing that kind of pulls together our burger. I think keeping it simple, making sure you get really good beef.
Do you put anything in the meat, when you're doing your patty or not at all?
Yeah, so our burger looks very much inspired by a Big Mac. It's very simple, but we use all ribeye. So we actually use the ribeye cap, which like deckle, it's like one of the most prized pieces of meat, and we grind it into a burger, which some people may not be happy that we do that, but I think it's like the best blend of like most smash patties are very lean, but we like having something that's kind of nice and fat. So it's simple. Like we season ours with salt and pepper inside the grind, and that's it. I think a lot of people try to overcomplicate it and you end up covering it, but if you have really high quality beef, seasoning it appropriately and making sure you don't bury it in sauces. We try to keep ours very, very clean and simple, but we take onions almost like you're making like a sous vide and just cook it very low and slow, a little butter and salt. Our special sauce, which is also probably the most important ingredient, it starts off with soft cooked eggs. So we cook our eggs for 6 minutes and then we smoke them until they're bright yellow and we blend that, and that's what we use to make our base of our sauce. So that is, I think that's one of the
wow.
Yeah, so that's anytime you can add any kind of like smoke, especially when you're doing a pan, you're not grilling it.
Sure.
So if you have the time or you have the ability to smoke your eggs before you make like a sauce.
So what kind of sauce do you make with the eggs? What do you add?
So it starts off with 6 eggs. We cook them for 6 minutes, smoke them for about 30 minutes to an hour. It's a cold smoke, but we like it to kind of, they're peeled so the whites become like bright yellow. Then we blend that with cornichons, a really heavily garlic and cherry mayonnaise, just a little bit of that to kind of bring it all together. A little smoked paprika, and then yellow mustard. So it's basically like our version of like special sauce. But the thing that really kind of brings it together and gives it that really wonderful like luscious texture and smoke are those eggs. If we didn't have that sauce, it wouldn't be the burger wouldn't be as great as it is.
Oh wow. Okay, great, chef. I mean, it's great idea. I'm going to try this summer for sure. Yeah. Maybe not as much details as you explain, sure. but I'm going to try to leverage some of the ingredients and the techniques that you mentioned.
Fantastic.
Before I let you go, I always finish the show with a series of rapid fire questions. You ready for them?
Yeah, let's go. Let's do it.
Okay, so you and I, are going on a Flavors Unknown tasting trek in Washington, D.C. So which are the 5 places that you will take me to? And Reverie could be one of them, but...
Well, I get that's an easy one. So I won't say Reverie. That's too much. I would say, so in no particular order and or reason, I would say 2 Amy's, Haleo, Minibar, because that's very unique. That's
true. We didn't even talk about Jose Andres and Minibar.
I know. Yeah, I mean, that was we kind of, not to say we jumped around that, but that was definitely like my stepping stone to get into Spain. But that's why those restaurants are so important to me. Like Haleo is just something I always crave, and the Minibar is like truly a unique experience that is, a lot of people will compare it to like El Bulli and everything else, but it is so unique to itself. So then outside of that,
do you see him? By the way, do you see him? Do you see Chef Jose Andres still, today? Because this guy is really busy.
Yeah, he's
everywhere.
He's busy. He's everywhere. But he's got a restaurant right next door to me. So we still have a good relationship. Like,
good.
If Jose definitely, he's pushed me more in a sense of like understanding how to make a dream a reality. If that makes, I know it's kind of a very blanket statement, but Minibar is unlike most restaurants in the United States. It's like truly an experience, but it's open. It pays its bills. You can be a dreamer, and it's not just about having ideas. It's about being able to make those ideas happen, and that's definitely what I learned working for him. That's why his restaurants are important. So we have we had 2 Amy's, Haleo, Minibar, Sushi Taro, and Komi.
Okay, can you give me 3 dishes that you could not live without cooking or eating?
Ooh, yeah. Let's see. Without cooking or eating, steamed crabs. I'm from Maryland, and that's like steamed crabs in the Old Bay. That is something like if I would eat that for the rest of my life if I had to. Pizza, no particular pizza, but obviously probably 2 Amy's, but could not live without that. Let's see. That's a hard one. I'm trying to narrow it down to so many different things. The seafood's so important to what I do, but yeah, what kind of seafood do you like? Live scallops. I love scallops, and we'll always have that on the menu. It's been on the menu since day one, and I will never take it off. And
by the way, you went to Spain, and you're talking about seafood. And you talk about the Basque Country. Have you tried when you were there what they call the percebes?
Yes.
Those little seafood. I love those
too.
I've been to Spain many times. So.
Yeah, they're fantastic. They have some that actually grow domestically, Pacific Northwest, that You can occasionally get over there. They're different. I mean, it's the same idea, but they're not as good as the ones you get in Spain. They're delicious.
Okay, so scallops was, okay, so your third one. What is your favorite guilty pleasure food?
Man, there's two. It's probably a Big Mac. I don't eat fast food at all.
Okay.
I quit doing a lot of stuff. Like, I don't drink, I don't smoke, and I don't eat McDonald's, but there's always that small desire just to go across the bridge to Virginia. It's right here, and I can see it. I go get a Big Mac after work. I always tell people because everybody always asks me that. I'm like, well, if it brings you pleasure, you shouldn't feel guilty about it. But going to get a Big Mac definitely wouldn't make me feel guilty if I went after, instead of running home to my wife and daughter, I went like, hey, I want to go to McDonald's. I would feel guilty because of that.
Okay. What are the top 3 cookbooks that inspire you the most?
Michel Brun. There's actually probably two newer cookbooks. I feel like it's like asking what my favorite bands are. They always change. But the WD-50 cookbook, because my meal at WD-50 when I was 21, changed. Again, another moment in time that changed my life. And then Ronnie Emborg, the Wizard's Cookbook. He was at AOC in Copenhagen, and then now he's at Atera in New York. And his book is stylistically, he's like the perfect blend of this new Spanish influence and new Nordic, and it's truly his food. And it was like one of the greatest dining experiences I've ever had. So those are my top 3 right now. It will probably change tomorrow. And
so the last one, what's the favorite food place that among all the places that you travel to?
Probably the one that, just standing out right now immediately is when I went to Skiji Market. I had a friend of mine who put me in touch with a tuna buyer, and I was able to go onto the tuna floor. And then at 5 o'clock in the morning, I went and he took me to his favorite, the guy who works at Skiji Market took me to his favorite sushi restaurant in the market. And it was one of the, I ate there by myself. I had some of the most amazing fish that day at 5 o'clock in the morning. And that was that's something I will never forget, that I was able to do that. That was pretty amazing.
So, Chef, thank you very much for your time. I loved, to having you on, on the show. That's something that we have been talking about for, several months. So I'm glad we did it. Thank you for your time again.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the podcast Flavors Unknown. It was great to have Chef Johnny Spero as a guest. You can get the burger recipe as well as other references that the chef mentioned during the podcast on the website flavorsunknown.com. And then on the contact page on the same website, you can find a survey. It would be great if you could take it. It's anonymous. It takes only 5 minutes. There's only 6 easy questions. It will help me to create a better content, for the show. If you like the podcast, please share it with other foodies, because I'm always welcoming new listeners to the show. My next guest will be Chef Kim Alter from Nightbird in San Francisco. I see you in 2 weeks, and until then, remember that people who love to eat are always the best people.
Thanks for listening to Flavors Unknown. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to leave a review. Find the show notes at flavorsunknown.com. And if you want to join the Flavors Unknown community, search Flavors Unknown on Instagram and Twitter.